He turned Yellowbook into a multi-billion-dollar business by taking on one of America's biggest monopolies. Then he survived every technology wave that was supposed to destroy his business, from print to digital to SaaS and now AI. After decades of leading through disruption, Joe Walsh, CEO of Thryv, believes the real job of a CEO is this.
The definition of CEO is sort of seeing the future for people and then helping be ready and bring that to pass.
He scaled Yellowbook from 38 million to more than 2 billion and went on to reinvent struggling legacy businesses during multiple technology revolutions. And what makes this conversation so relevant right now is that Joe has seen this cycle before.
Pretty much every year for the next 15 or 20 years, people said it would be over in three years.
In this episode, you'll discover how leaders survive massive disruption, why being too early can be just as dangerous as being too late, and what AI means for both billion-dollar companies and Main Street businesses.
The second mouse gets the cheese.
This is a masterclass in leadership, reinvention, and navigating uncertainty when the rules keep changing.
So AI is a whole new deal. This is big. It changes everything, and it's coming fast.
I'm your host, Ben Fanning. It's time to lead the team. Joe Walsh, Chairman and CEO at Thryv. Welcome to Lead the Team, my friend.
Glad to be here.
Joe, you've spent your career leading through industries that everyone said were about to disappear, from Yellowbook to digital to SaaS and now AI. What have these transitions taught you about leadership when the future feels uncertain?
Well, I mean, change is constant, right? So there's a constant evolution of technology, of media to work with. And so I don't think it's a question of one big change. I think you're always, if you're a leader, you're looking down the track trying to figure out where will the world be. I mean, really, the definition of CEO is sort of seeing the future for people and then helping be ready and bring that to pass. That is the job. And so I spent, this week I've been at an AI conference all week. I got back late last night, and I was, going through some, 90 booths of people with the latest. I mean, they got their venture backing a week ago and they're there with their booth, ideas like bleeding edge, the newest ideas, some small ideas, some really big ideas that may not work out. And then presentations from, leaders that are making an impact with, sort of AI native. These businesses didn't even exist a year ago, kind of thing. So my job is to do that, and then next week I'll be talking to customers. I'll be in the field with our salespeople. I'll be calling on customers. I do Zooms with customers, talking to them about what they're seeing, what they're thinking, what they're feeling. And at a simple level, my job is to put those two things together. Where the cutting edge of the market is and what the needs of customers are. Sort of see that future, predict that future for our people, and then work hard to make sure that we can bring that to pass inside of our company. That's the basics of being a CEO.
And you've had to do that repeatedly through massive technology shifts. Was there a moment during the Yellowbook years when you realized the future was changing faster than people expected?
It's funny, Ben. The Yellow Pages was propagated by the phone companies. So they were required to publish a subscriber list, and they end up selling advertising to underwrite putting that list out, right, to people. And the Yellow Pages was born. And, the very famous printer, R.R. Donnelley, his brother, Reuben Donnelley, was like I don't know if he was great or not great, but he went out and began calling on phone companies saying, I'll put your phone book list out for free. Just let me sell the advertising. And that's how the Yellow Pages thing, kind of started way back when. Anyway, the very first conference I went to, and I'd been in business a couple of years at that point, but I went to a big, national conference, and all these egghead phone company types were there, and they were there with their charts and graphs and, at that time, overhead projector slides and all that. And they started describing, that this this Yellow Pages business was going to be gone in 3 to 5
Hmm.
years because of, online connectivity, which sort of turned into the internet over time. And they were predicting it was over in a hurry back then, and they were just
Hmm.
way, way early. Um,
Hmm.
and pretty much every year for the next 15 or 20 years, people said it would be over in three 3 years. We're now finally at the point, Ben, where it'll be over in about 3 years for Yellow Pages. We're there now, a long time later. So it is interesting, people imagine when they see technology that the future is going to come. I remember Elon Musk, 5 years ago said, we'll be self-driving cars everywhere in 3 years, and it's starting to happen now. But we're still, a number of years away from that being, a main thing. So the speed
Wow.
at which technology comes, again, is I think as leaders, we have to understand what's coming. We have to
Hmm.
really think that through. And then we have to be able to reasonably calibrate how it's going to affect our customers and then our business serving those customers. And
What
you are badly
that
penalized if you're too far in front of the curve. There's a lot of people that are too early. The 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 second mouse gets the cheese. Like the first one, the trap gets him, and the second mouse has the cheese. So
oof.
you can be too early and fail because you're too early. Um, and
Is
you can
that
have your head in the sand and be too late. There's sort of a right place to be.
Hey there, this is Ben. If you want more conversations just like this, then subscribe now because we're on a mission to bring you the leaders that you don't usually hear from. The CEOs on the front lines, building real organizations, making real decisions, and driving real change. Not the ones just making the headlines in the Wall Street Journal, but the ones doing the work that actually matters, the work powering the global economy. New episodes every week where you'll learn how they built their careers, how they think, and how they lead. So you can take those lessons and make yourself and your team even stronger. I'd like to explore that. I don't know if this ties into this first question more too about listeners are going to hear you scaled Yellow Book from 38 million to 2 billion. How in the world did you do that? Was it was it related to being second at the second mouse, or was it a different skill set that saw you through that?
Well, the Yellow Pages was a natural monopoly. And the reason it was a natural monopoly is the phone companies had the Yellow Pages business, and it was the only unregulated part of of the telephone company. So
Hmm.
everything else is regulated, how much they can charge for long distance, local, for a phone, to rent a phone, all the different things that were going on back then. And so there is a public utility commission that meets and decides what the pricing is going to be. And the phone company has giant teams that negotiate to try to get that price up. And there's a certain profit margin the phone companies were allowed to make. The one part of the phone company that wasn't regulated was the Yellow Pages. And so at the time, the regional Bell operating companies were spun off from Ma Bell. 25% of the operating profit of the phone companies came from the Yellow Pages, and it was just 4% of the revenue.
Hmm.
So this was an incredibly profitable business, and it wasn't regulated. So they could make any number they wanted. And remember, it's a monopoly. So if the inflation that year was, 2.8%, they could raise prices 8.8% if they wanted to. So they usually did raise prices 2 to 3 times the rate of inflation because it was a heck of a good deal, and they just were pounding the customers with these huge price increases. And then they invented all kinds of custom run friendly policies to get more and more and more money out of the customers. And so the
Hmm.
customers were very irritated and angry over the monopolistic behavior that the provider of Yellow Pages was giving. So we showed up at a Coke Pepsi challenge, kind of a Hertz-Avis, we're here, we try harder, and showed up at less than half the price point of what the incumbent Yellow Pages charged. And incredible service and all kinds of extra goodies and features. And we made it cool to be with us. And lots of small businesses thought that made a lot of sense and signed up with us. And then we gave the consumer a directory with more ads in it, more buying information, more content. And we won over a huge consumer share. And what was interesting about this is it was a century old business that we took a giant $2 billion chunk out of in the space of about a decade. We did it very, very quickly. And we did it nationally, right? All the way across the country.
So would you say, going back to your mouse analogy, Yellow Book was the second mouse?
No, I think that analogy
No,
doesn't apply because
doesn't apply.
we this wasn't a technological shift. We were using the original Yellow Pages technology at that time, print phone books that
Okay.
had been around forever. So what was different was um, we took on that entrenched monopoly, and they did certain things to try to stop us. They sued us in court. They tried to stop, so they wouldn't give us the subscriber listings. We went to Washington and got Congress to pass a law to say they had to. So there was a lot that happened where the monopolist was trying to stop us from, storming the castle. And we were young and aggressive and passionate, and we persuaded the lawmakers to change the rules. And we fought a really expensive battle in court and won that. And we managed to attract investment capital, which people were scared. Well, you can't invest against the monopoly; we'll get squished. Anytime the phone company wants to kill us, they can. But we found some intrepid investors that backed us, and they made a ton of money on their investment.
What a story. So kicking back and thinking about those days, what is the big leadership lesson that you take away?
Well, I've always been guided by simple, very simple core principles and values. And so to me, as you navigate your way through all these different situations, you come back over and over again to these basic touchstones. And um, if you can help enough other people get what they want, you can get what you want. I mean, it's a pretty simple thing. And
Hmm.
so, consumers wanted rich buying information about the options available in their community. So we try to give them that, like way better than any other option, way better than the incumbent monopolist was giving them. So we innovated like crazy. We invented menus right in the Yellow Pages and all kinds of other, we made all the ads. The ads were either big or really big. We didn't have any tiny ads. Our print was really big, so you could read the thing easily. We reformatted the directory so that the columns were wider and it was just easier to read the thing. So, a lot of the people that use the book are older people. And so we would give them a book they could read. And for small businesses who were the supporters, the advertisers, we charged them prices that were less than half and then gave them all
Hmm.
kinds of goodies and then proved to them that we were delivering better value by tracking every phone call they got and comparing it to their bill and showing them what the cost per lead was or the cost per call was.
Wow.
It was
Yes.
actually relatively easy, but it was all about helping people just get what they want. And then in terms of, attracting employees to it, we created a cause. We were all on a mission. We were gonna crush the monopoly, and we used to have this sign that had the Bell logo with the no smoking sign across it, shatter the monopoly. And when we entered new
Hmm.
market, talked about, you've been suffering under this, monopoly for years. We're going to shatter that monopoly. We're going to do it fast. We were so aggressive that some cities we went into, we would go out and give away ads in the phone book, publish the entire thing for free, distribute it to everybody, not charge a penny, and then come back and renew it the next year so that people didn't have to take a flyer on whether or not we could actually pull it off. Because their objection would be, well, how do we know you could beat the phone company? Phone company's been here for a century. It's the phone company. We just went in and proved it and then asked them to buy it in a lot of markets. So an aggressive
Hmm.
story.
Yeah, I love that. It's even more powerful when you give so much value in advance
Right.
of the buying decision. It gives you trust, it's proof, it's credibility.
Then
Um,
that's exactly
yeah,
right. Yep.
man. So walk us from that time period to now Thrive. Because
Sure.
I mean,
So
Yellow Book was iconic. And I didn't realize, I never knew this David versus Goliath story.
Oh
That was
yeah. And
incredible.
in the background, they were
Uh,
suing us and attacking us. And oh my gosh, they they ran all kinds of billboards against us. And the more they talked about us, the better it was. And it was fun. Anyway, I, as a young guy, growing up, I really wanted to try to figure out how to be successful somehow. And I read the biographies of great men and women. I studied countries, companies, sports teams, anything that had been successful to try to
mm,
sort of make a study of success. And I really wanted to, uh, own my own business, do my own thing. And I'm sure your parents were okay, but I had the greatest parents that there ever were. And so I really wanted to be in a position to take care of them as they got older. My dad was the mailman and my mom was like a clerk at the phone company. They didn't have a lot of money. I'm from a big family. So they were not going to be, doing all that well later in life. So I was determined to make enough money to take good care of them. And it's amazing how hard you can work when you're doing it for somebody else, when you're not
mm,
just doing it for yourself. When it's 5:30 and it's super hot and you're exhausted, you can walk through another 5 or 6 doors cold calling because 'cause you're doing it for somebody else. You can dial the phone
mm,
10 more times because 'cause you're doing it for your dear old mom. It's amazing the motivation it unlocks. So, that was where I kinda came from, and I didn't have the idea to compete in the Yellow Pages. I met another guy who had the idea, um, and, he hired me, and everybody else he was hiring was failing, and I figured out how to do it. And so we ended up incorporating the business as partners and building this thing. And I built it up. We were always undercapitalized, but I ended up selling it into a bigger business, and we eventually sold that on to yet another bigger one. I guess I had a couple what we call exits pretty young, and then I joined Yellow Book, and Yellow Book was a pretty small company, and we grew it into a pretty big one. It was ended up being a global company, 4 billion in revenue on the London Stock Exchange.
mm.
So I stayed for more than a decade after we took it public, but I eventually did move on just because I didn't want to only do one thing in my life. And I got into the education business, and I was working in a company called Cambium Learning Group. Their ticker symbol was ABCD. It was a NASDAQ listed company. And listen to this, Ben. They published print learning materials. So, and guess what came at them? Digital and everything to do with digital. And so their stock price had previously been like it was $7 or $8 a share, was down to under $1 a share by the time they contacted me and brought me in. And we pivoted the business really hard from the printed textbooks and materials to a monthly recurring subscription type model where we delivered the pedagogical power that we had in the
Mm.
paper, but we delivered it in a monthly subscription. And we packaged it in a way where it was interactive games and things the kids thought were really fun, but we snuck some learning in there on them and when they weren't looking and made it
That's
really
the way to
fun. And
do it.
so we were able to give the administrators these statistics of how their kids were doing, and help them prepare for the big standardized tests. And we were able to customize the learning for each kid, even in the same class, based on how they were doing with each of the games and interactive tools. And these things started selling like hotcakes. And
Mm,
we were in 46 countries around the world. We had millions and millions of kids. And eventually, the
mm.
stock price, which had been we had gotten a delisting letter from NASDAQ. When you drop below $1 a share, they tell you you have like 100 days to cure it, or we're going to take you off the stock exchange. Not only didn't they take us off the stock exchange, but 6.5 years later, Veritas, a big private equity firm, paid us $14.50 a share and bought the entire company, took it private. And it's continuing to rock and roll today. It's really doing well. So that was a really fun one for me. It was 6.5 years flat out of converting a legacy print business that was under tremendous pressure to a monthly recurring revenue model. And it was really successful.
Wow. Why in the world did you go to that business? 'Cause you're like, did you see the vision before you arrived of what was possible? Or
No,
what was the impetus? Because you
I
built
wish,
this.
man, I could tell you. I'm clairvoyant. I saw it all. Um, One of the private equity partners that backed the Yellow Book run. Remember, the Yellow Book run was like a couple of decades. And so we had a bunch of different financial partners over the years. One of the tricks to being a good CEO is change out the batteries before they need changing out. So every 3 years or so, you bring in new financial partners. It's like a smoke detector, right? You're supposed to change the batteries every now and then. Um,
Hmm.
you keep them excited, you keep them pumped up, and you give them a good return, and you bring in the next guys. And so one of my backers at Yellow Book that had made $5.50 for every dollar they put in, and they did so in 23 months with us. They
Hmm.
liked me and thought thought I was great. When I left Yellow Book and I set up my little board advisory practice, they were the first ones to call, and they said, "Look, we want you to come be the CEO of Cambium. We own a large stake in Cambium." And I said, "Look, I just been a CEO for 20 odd years. I'm looking to be more in an advisor situation." So I went in initially as a board advisor just to see what was going on. And I went out in the field with the sales reps and called on the customers. I went into the operations meetings of the different little divisions that they had and listened to day-long presentations about the pedagogical power of what they did, and started looking at when they worked with these children that couldn't read. I mean, they literally were in fourth and fifth grade and couldn't read. Um, they were able to help these kids learn to read. And you realize, you read to learn. So if you can't read, like the whole world seems hard to you. And I
Hmm.
came out of those meetings feeling like I wanted to run 5 miles and chop a cord of wood. Just I was so excited about what these guys were doing for kids with reading, and they had a similar program for math. Um, and it was failing because all of a sudden the iPhone had been invented, the iPad had been invented, and all the parents were like, "My kid's carrying all these books on his back, and we're hurting the environment printing these things, and it's all everything you're doing is bad. We want it all digital." And the company was completely unprepared to do that. The leaders
Hmm.
at the time were in their middle 60s. They didn't even understand technology. They were like, "What? We don't even get it." And so I just became inspired by the opportunity to
Hmm.
make a difference here. And I'd made a lot of money building Yellow Book, and this was a chance to help kids like all over the world, like make a big impact with people that couldn't read or couldn't figure out fractions and weren't going to be able to kind of go on to any STEM type careers. And we had tools that will allow them to do that. We just need to package them and deliver them, in this other format. So I told
Hmm.
the private equity firm that I would take the company over as executive chairman and work with the people that were in the company. So I fired all the top managers, elevated a bunch of people inside the business that really understood kids, that really understood what could happen here. And then I sort of managed the Wall Street issues. And luckily I had a little credibility from what we had done at Yellow Book. So Wall Street was like, okay, well, you know, let's give him a minute.
Wow.
And we
So
managed to
you so you
turn it
went
around.
so you kind of got off the bench, so to speak, because you were just inspired by the cause of this organization. You weren't attacking the monopoly. You were helping people read,
Right.
and you're like, okay, this is worth getting back in the game for this. And then
All
you
you
get
had to
in there,
do
and then you start seeing it.
Ben, all you had to do was sit in a readout when they showed these kids and the difference that we made for those kids. And I remember I was out in the field
Okay.
calling on charter schools, calling on these small independent schools, called big public schools, the
Hmm.
Texas, school system out in LA, talking about the LA unified school system, meeting with them, looking at the data, looking at the impact that we were delivering, and the chief academic officers weren't going to be able to buy what we were doing anymore because it was on paper. And I
Okay.
became really inspired. I got really excited about it, and and I fell in love with these people. They had the smart people that were just really great at creating this stuff. So anyway, I used my little bit of
Yeah.
business skills and tried to help them.
What? Congratulations. All right. So now fast forward. All right. Holy smokes! You get into you do your thing at
Mm.
Yellow Book. You start your consultancy for like a week. or whatever. Then you get pulled in. You like see this noble cause. You move in. You're able to apply a lot of your learnings to this new industry. And my gosh, what a payout for private equity and making a positive impact. When does Thrive come into the picture?
So what happened was the Cambium business was in Dallas, and I live in Maryland, and I'm flying back and forth to Dallas, and the Yellow Pages business at that time was called Dex Media, had half the country, was headquartered on the airport campus right there in Dallas. And the guy who was running that company had been a competitor of mine in the Yellow Pages business. Remember, I'd been out of the Yellow Pages business for a few years at this point. He was a competitor, but between you and me, he was a good friend. Like I didn't tell the workers that we were friends, but we were, he was a really good guy, a good family man, good dad. And so he was calling me for advice because I was no longer in the industry. So I'd give him advice. And he said, would you come the next time you're in Dallas? You're right here on the airport campus. We're like a mile from the runway. Will you just come over and have like a turkey sandwich with me? So I did. And
A turkey sandwich.
he sprung
So
his chairman on me.
specific.
So I come into this long mahogany table, in this big fancy phone company, gigantic 7-building, 450,000 square foot campus, gorgeous place, hushed carpeted hallways, potted plants everywhere, lots of nice people. And uh, before in my other life, they probably wouldn't even let me in there. I was storming the gates, and now I'm walking in,
Ooh.
and I'm having my turkey sandwich with the CEO and now his chairman. And remember, I'm doing Cambium, and they say we want you to be the CEO of this. The internet and
Yeah.
Google and all that stuff is upsetting our world. We're not making our numbers, and we're not really sure what to do, and we could use your help. And we think that you're tech savvy enough and young enough, and you figured out how to beat up on us, so maybe you could figure out how to do this. And I said, I don't, I'm busy and I don't really want to do that. I just was the CEO of a Yellow Pages business for a long time. I'm not sure I want to do that again. And so they said, well, we see on your little landing page, your little website, that you do strategy work. Could we hire you to think of a strategy for us? And I groaned and I threw out this ridiculous number that I would need to charge. They said, okay. And they shook my hand. They said, let's do it. And it was, it was one of those things where I figured for sure they would, let me go. And so I signed up to do it, and I brought in some of my team members, and we worked on a strategy for the company. And it was very simple. It was that at that time, big companies like Cambium Learning Group, my ed company, were moving our computing into the cloud. And small businesses hadn't even heard of the cloud. There was no cloud for small businesses in 2014. There was, and I intuited that those cloud opportunities would work their way down from the big companies to medium-sized companies and eventually to everyday mom and pop companies. And that this company, Dex Media, the Yellow Pages business, had relationships with hundreds of thousands of small businesses that trusted them. And if they could lead them through this transition, they could basically be a SaaS software provider, of preferential one to those people and help guide them through the transition. So, I presented that idea. I didn't come up with that instantly. It took a little while, but I presented that idea to the board, and they thought it was a great idea, and they basically made me an offer I couldn't refuse to come in and do it. So, Ben, the interesting part of the story is I was running Cambium and Dex for 4-year overlap at the same time. They were both in Dallas. I live in Maryland. So I'd fly down to Dallas. I'd go to Cambium, spend some time doing my meetings. Then I'd go across town. It was like, I don't know, 17 miles over to Dex. I'd go run over to Dex, do my meetings at Dex, kind of go back and forth. Dex had a hotel. I had a permanent hotel room, and I stayed there and kind of went back and forth.
What is it like to be CEO of two different companies at the same time?
Well, I was executive chairman of Cambium. I wasn't
Okay.
so I had elevated uh, an excellent guy who'd been in the company for years that they just nobody noticed he was the guy, and elevated him into the CEO job, and I was executive chairman. So I was acting as a CEO, to be honest with you. He was more of a COO at that time in the beginning, but he grew into the job beautifully, and he made Cambium a real success. So we together kind of crafted the strategy, but he executed it beautifully. Uh, as happened in Dex, I brought a whole team in when I joined, and they executed that vision really, really well.
Wow. And how did Dex become Thrive?
Uh, well, we invented. So my idea was to deliver, you know, software that would help small businesses, make this transition, and we needed a brand. And we quickly came up with a brand called Dex Hub, and we had this little Dex Hub that we went out with, and that wasn't a great brand. It was like a quick placeholder. And then we went through a process to come up with what would be an ownable, memorable, good brand. We used an agency to help us think about it. We came up with Thryv, and we ended up naming our software offering Thryv. And we ran the company as Dex still, and the software offering was Thryv. And eventually, when we felt that we had the company and the software and the offering in good enough shape, we rebranded the company over to Thryv.
You guys were really first in a lot of ways in providing that technology to Main Street America, right? Plumbers, the dentist,
Yep.
electricians. Why wasn't the enterprise organizations, why were they missing this opportunity? Seems
The
like
big
you,
money was being made in delivering these tools to enterprise, to the Fortune 2000, the big businesses, like the big guys. Um, and there were plenty of entrepreneurs trying to do something like it, but they had trouble getting distribution. They would, you know, they'd have, a few hundred or a couple thousand customers. We had hundreds of thousands of customers because we were born big because we've been in business since 1886. So the difference
hmm,
was we were able to gain big scale quickly. And even today, Thrive is much, much larger than most of the other kind of software competitors that are out there. Not because we're geniuses, 'cause we started with a giant company, and we were successfully able to take those customers and get them on board. So we had the reach, we had the distribution.
love it. So let's tie this back to AI and your conference yesterday,
Mm.
what you guys are doing at Thrive. What most AI conversations are happening right now at the enterprise level, big companies. What does AI look like for the plumber, the dentist, and the spa owners and local attorneys?
So AI is a whole new deal. I mean, this is not your garden variety trend, or it's not the CB radio or something like that. This is not something that's going to come and go really quick. This is big, and it changes everything, and it's coming fast. Um, and interestingly, small businesses are embracing it fairly well. That's not in an even way. It's uneven, but a lot of them are really beginning to get involved with it, beginning to use it. And it has the potential to democratize a lot of things where bigger companies have a real advantage because they have giant staffs or whatever. AI can crush those advantages in a hurry. And actually being big
Hmm.
and having been around a long time can be a negative because you have inertia. You have, well, this is how we've always done it. And where the startup or the younger company or the challenger um, doesn't have the tech debt, doesn't have the legacy processes,
Hmm.
can just innovate. So I do think it will remake the landscape, and a lot of companies that have been, long time, very successful businesses may falter a little bit. And we may have, some new names, some new brands, both at the national level, but even in, Chattanooga, Tennessee. I think there'll be, entrepreneurs who take better advantage of this that will just do a little better than the ones who don't.
Since you work with so many small businesses, what can AI Like, where are the places in a small business where AI can make the biggest initial impact, and you're seeing that? And where are the areas where AI really will never be able to replace those in small business?
I mean, the people aspects of business are really important, right? So, I mean, if you've got,
Mm.
an auto repair shop, the AI is not going to jump in and actually change the oil or put the brakes on the car. Um, you need a technician to do that, and you need a relationship with those customers. So that's all people stuff. But you can sure order the parts more
Mm.
efficiently. You can sure, rather than going to microfiche to look at the part thing, AI can show you a breakout and an assembly of it and explain to you how to fix it and help you. And it can do your billing, it can do your bookkeeping, it can do your marketing, it can do a lot of stuff for you. So many businesses today rely on promoting themselves over social media. We see the revenue that Facebook Meta has. Um, you know, that's a lot of work. And a lot of these small businesses are not really equipped to do that work. They're meant to be plumbers, or they're meant to be, roofers or whatever. And the work to try to manage social media is hard for them. So in my company, Thryv, we've always done a lot of that stuff for them. Well, now we're using AI type tools and AI platforms to make it super easy for them to do that. And so
Mm.
that would gain a competitive advantage over the roofer who puts his head in the sand and says, "No, I don't know about that stuff. I don't want to know about that stuff. That's not my thing." Um, so the ones that embrace either a company like Thrive that does it with them and for them, or takes lots and lots of time to figure out how to do it on their own, gets a real advantage.
Joe, you've lived through and you have walked us through multiple massive technology shifts. What have those experiences taught you about leadership when the future is unclear?
Well, I mentioned earlier, I've always sort of adhered to a set of core principles and values. You know, uh, in the Bible it says, "Do unto others as you would have them do unto you." I think when you start with the golden rule, just kind of start
Hmm.
right there, and you realize that your rewards in life will match your service. And there really isn't any way to kind of unhook those. Maybe in one day they're not lined up, or in 1 month or week, but over the arc of your life, your rewards will match your
Hmm.
service. And so I think that's true for us as people, but I also think it's true for companies. And when I took over the old telephone company Yellow Pages business, its service was worth less and less and less because Google was disintermediating it from the market. And so its fortunes were going down, its revenue was dropping very fast because rewards and service were trying to get back in line. you know, they
Hmm.
were getting more
Hmm.
rewards than the service they were delivering for a minute and as decline was happening. So I really think, trying to stay close to your core principles and values, delivering value to people is really how it all works. The technology is going to do what it's going to do, and business is not that hard, Ben. I don't think. I mean, so many people, what is it? Woody Allen or somebody said, 90% of success is just showing up. Um, if you
Yes.
wash your face, brush your teeth, show up on time every day, and you read and you pay attention and you listen, you're almost already there. If you just study what's happening in the market around
Hmm.
you, what technological changes are coming, what's the best and the brightest seem to be doing, it just isn't that hard. I mean, you can actually copy what other people are doing and be very, very successful. If you happen to be smart enough to actually put a couple of ideas together and be a little bit out in front, then all the better. But it isn't, I don't think business is that hard at all. Tell people the truth, show up on time, work really hard, and you can be amazingly successful. There's
Hmm.
also another principle I was talking to a gentleman this morning about, and there's a risk reward uh, arc. If you take no risks whatsoever, you really can't get very big rewards, to be honest with you, you know? And if you're willing to,
Hmm.
and you have an appetite to take on some risk, then your rewards can start to be a little bit bigger. And you can do that, I think, in accordance with those principles and values that we talked about.
So, so good. So many just like we're looking forward to your book whenever it comes out. like life leadership lessons with Joe. So good. Last question here. Leaders are feeling overwhelmed a lot of places with all the change coming. They're seeing it, they're experiencing it. You're seeing it. You have an interesting role because you work with executive leaders at big enterprises and you also work in with Main Street. What's your what's the next step that leaders that are feeling overwhelmed with all the change should take first?
That's an excellent question. I mean, just coming back from 3 days at a bleeding edge AI conference, you know, I'm thinking about some of those missiles are coming for me. Like some of the stuff people are inventing
Yeah.
could potentially alter, our business plan. But luckily, I'm there and I'm thinking about it. I'm thinking about, what's our role in this and how we can do it. Um, so coming back to your question, I think what was the the in the UK during the Blitz, they had the stay calm and carry on. I think the
Okay. Yeah.
first thing is to realize that the game is not won or lost in a day or in a week. That's a great thing about business. That there isn't really a clock where you just run out of time. You have an opportunity. So I think if you just keep buggering on, as Winston Churchill said, keep moving forward and make sure that you're taking good care of your clients and thinking about not just what they need now, but what they're going to need in the future as this new landscape evolves. That's always what I do. I talk to them with in the back of my mind what those technological things I'm seeing coming over the hill are and try to figure out realistically which one of
Mm,
those could they reach for and which ones are not going to happen for a while.
mm.
And I remember, going back to your Yellow Pages question in the beginning, when people said that the Yellow Pages was going to be gone so quickly, I remember going home and, booting up my computer and, you know, waiting while slowly the screen constructed itself. And I thought, if my toilet's overflowing, this is not how I'm going to get the information. So I was pretty sure that it was out a little ways. And so I got focused on, what was real and not what was theoretical. But anyway,
Oof.
I think
So
business
good,
is a
man.
really fun game because you get to, work with and help a lot of people. And it's not all that hard. If you just show up every day and work hard at it, you can't ignore the technological trends, but you also can't get too far out in front of them. You have to be realistic about the adoption curve and how it's all going to come.
Joe, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. It's been a fun one.
Good. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope it was helpful to folks.